And welcome. I love this scene of I think it was a scene from a movie. A woman goes into a restaurant and she's seated at a table next to another woman who's just alone at the table right next to her. And the other woman, after a time, leans over and says, "Excuse me, but is the voice inside my head bothering you?" We have this ongoing narrative, these ongoing voices that occur, and sometimes I think of them as somethings, like there's just something in me that's wants this or is saying that. And I was thinking about this. I was reminded how, as we're in the summer season and wedding time, I'm reminded that I have a wedding anniversary coming up, and I thought about my wedding with Tara, good number of years ago now, and we ended up doing a pretty big deal, and part of it was doing the dance. Something in me really did not want to do the dance in the middle with everyone watching. I seriously did not want to do it. But something in me wanted to please Tara because this was a big deal to her. Something in me thought, hey, I can dance. I used to dance in college, and I've got about four moves that I think they're not bad. And so we got someone to teach us a dance. And if by any chance as the teacher you're watching this, my apologies, but I deeply, deeply hated you. Um, it was we were learning this complex dance, and this teacher was so skilled, but I'm afraid it was one of those teachers who's so good, they just can't communicate how to do it. It's like, you do this and blah, 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 blah. And so more and more, there was something in me hating this teacher and something in me absolutely dreading this dance because it was not coming to me easily. So we were taking a little bit of time that summer. We were up on the Cape, and there's a lot of in the house we were staying. There was this wicker furniture, and at one point I was just barefoot walking along, and I was avoiding the dog, and I caught my toe in the wicker furniture, and my little toe was at 90 degrees to my foot, just snapped. And there was something in me that thought, this really hurts. And something in me that said, oh my God, I just got out of dancing at my wedding. Very complex, all these somethings inside. And the hilarious thing was, because I did get out of dancing at my wedding, we dropped the training, and but what happened was, as the dance was starting, I was pushed out on the dance floor, even though my foot was taped up, and I got to do the four moves I know for dancing, and then got off the floor, and everyone else started dancing, and a number of people said, "My God, you're such an amazing dancer." So something inside was deeply relieved and was also deeply pleased. So I'd like to talk about these somethings, or this voice. Michael Singer, great quote from him. He says, "In case you haven't noticed, you have a mental dialogue going on inside your head that never stops. It just keeps going and going. Have you ever wondered why it talks in there? How does it decide to say and when to say it? How much of what it says turns out to be true? How much of what it says is even important? And if right now you're hearing, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have any voice inside my head." That's the voice we're talking about. So, exploring the voice and all the voices, what I'd like to talk about in the time we have here is first the importance of establishing mindfulness, or the importance of establishing kind of non-preferential awareness, having that as a home base. Because part two, when you have that sense of the observer or the witness, then you can start to see into the nature of your conditioning. And from there, part 3, you can begin to identify the voices. You can get more familiar with them. And then part 4, you can start to work with them. So it really brings up this question of what is the goal of meditation? Is it to be less stressed? Is it to be more happy? Is it to be awake? Is it to be enlightened? And that's a whole other topic. What actually does enlightenment mean? But I do think no matter what your draw is to meditation, that there's something here about becoming less identified with your conditioning and more aware of what we could call unconditioned awareness. One of the great benefits of meditation is you start becoming less reactive and then more responsive. And that part of that is you're less identified with your reactive tendencies. And so in my experience of life, I have gotten much more familiar with what are called the 10,000 sorrows that occur in a lifetime. The experiences I've had of loss, of death, of illness, of shame, of failure, definitely had my share of those. But I've also had a number of experiences of the 10,000 joys, kind of the moments of mystical insight, whether they're just moments in meditation or moments in nature or moments of intimacy. And I would imagine that you've had these moments where you kind of sense in the moment there's nothing to add, there's nothing to take away. There's just this sense of how everything's already okay right now. Sometimes there's this sense of just seeing this kind of like luminescent, compassionate awareness that everything is really okay. Sometimes these moments come when you're active, when you kind of access that flow state. And that can be, again, when you're engaged in nature or intimacy or even at work where you're really locked into some task and you're in that sense of absorption. Sometimes they arise when in real stillness, when you're really, really quiet. You can feel that, just that sense of very deep innate joy that can arise out of stillness. And you might just sense for yourself, this quality of, there are different ways to describe it. Recently, I liked the phrase of non-preferential awareness. And if you like, let's do a little Zen pop quiz. And if you've listened at all to me or to Tara, you've done this practice. But if you like, just close your eyes. And just sense the breath. And just for a few moments, try not to be aware. Can you just sense, even if just for a moment here, this quality of non-preferential awareness? Simply awake to what is. Here's this thought, here's this feeling. There's no good, no bad, just awake. If you like, you can deepen your breath, and if you like, you could open your eyes. Accessing this quality of awareness, if you will, is super critical. And so we do this through the classic practice, and the classic approach through this lens of insight or vipassana is first you arrive. And you arrive by relaxing. You arrive by cultivating concentration, moment to moment to moment awareness. And the more you arrive, the more you begin to sense a little bit more of the here and now, the sense of continuity of here and now. From there, then you can begin to open into this sense of mindfulness, of 360-degree awareness, the sense of non-preferential awareness. And then here you toggle back and forth. You toggle from, okay, I'm kind of awake to the flow, but whoops, I just got identified. I'm lost in a story. You come back, you re-arrive, you relax, call on concentration, to establish moment-to-moment awareness, and then again, widen, broaden. And over time, this becomes more natural. And then you can explore from time to time as you get more grounded in the practice of arriving and then opening to flow, of really just dropping doing and opening into being, that sense of simply allowing everything to be as it is. So the byproduct of this, and sometimes I think of it as focus and flow and let go. The byproduct is you become more aware. And you become more aware of awareness itself, the nature of awareness itself, but you also become more aware of kind of of the heart space, a little bit more compassion. And what's so interesting is, for many people, certainly for me, there's some kind of an easing around this kind of anxious, conditioned self. I find myself, when I'm more mindful, when I'm more in that space of the observer, I'm less concerned with failure. And then I feel more creative. I'm willing to take more risks. I'm a little more spontaneous. If anger comes, it's there, but it doesn't stick quite as long as it does before. And sometimes I actually don't believe what I'm thinking. I can actually have the capacity to kind of observe my thoughts and realize, wow, I don't have to believe that thought. So mindfulness is this incredible element to develop, where you're fully present, you're aware of what's happening, you have the capacity to be with it, or you can sense how to be with it skillfully as opposed to a reactive place of being with it. And then the more you can sense this quality of kind of unconditioned awareness, a preferenceless awareness, guess what? You notice more and more into the nature of your conditioning. As we like to say, you feel better. You feel everything better. Your sadness, your grief, your suffering better. You become more aware of stimulus and response. And it's a magical space. The more free you get inside, the more aware you become where you're not free. And this is where it begins to open up this whole field of seeing more and more deeply into the nature of your conditioning. There was a period of time when I was sort of assisting or reporting directly to the CEO of the organization I was part of, and we got pretty close. And he was a really interesting guy. He was a very powerful, charismatic, kind of emotionally driven leader, but also very deeply committed to his practice. I remember him sharing with me once. He said, I just realized that when I get emotional and I get overwhelmed, I just realized that I ate a lot of sugar the day before, or maybe even the day before that. I thought, wow, that's amazing to kind of connect the dots. And I began to look for myself for the relationship between the times when I would feel overwhelmed or irritable or despairing, and kind of sense what may have happened in the past. What dots could I connect there? It really inspired me to look more at sort of like cause and effect in my own life. And I saw, well, there's definitely a relationship to sleep. And I realized that when I was sort of sleep deprived, guess what? I would become irritable and judgmental and grim. And so I just sort of spontaneously decided, when I'm tired, I'm just not going to believe what I'm feeling. I can acknowledge it, but I don't have to believe it. And with that, just in connecting those dots, there was just more wakefulness. And it kind of gave me a glimpse into what we sometimes talk about as spiritual reparenting. Like, hey, you're grumpy. Why don't you take a nap? So this sense of seeing into the nature of our conditioning, I find so interesting as we kind of connect the dots between our emotional state or our mental state and whatever the conditions might be that are part of that. I have this Aura ring, Oura, and it's a very, very good sleep tracker. It's really quite amazing. Just a small advertisement here for this. These little diodes here, and they read temperature, heart rate variability, and they can detect the 4 stages of sleep. And so one of the things was I've been a little bit manic around my sleep hygiene is not to eat 3 hours before I go to bed. Sometimes I don't succeed, and I'll eat a little something because I think if I don't eat something, I'm gonna wake up with a headache, and so I'll eat something. But then when I check my app in the morning, it'll say, "Did you eat a little bit late last night?" Oh. So we have these devices that are there to kind of remind us of our conditioning. If you've ever gotten a little prompt from your device saying, "How about getting up and stretching your legs?" And now, as I've been wearing this Aura ring for a while, I'll get a little signal from my Aura ring saying, based on the last, it doesn't say this exactly, but it says, based on the last 4 years of information, it looks like your optimal bedtime is now. Mindfulness, the sense of preferenceless awareness, can give you very powerful insights into the play of karma. And maybe you've noticed this more and more, the sense of cause and effect, kind of connecting your past actions to how you're feeling now. And have you ever noticed when you have the opportunity that when you're caught in a negative spiral of thinking, to kind of ask yourself, what was going on before I went into that spiral? And this becomes a very powerful part of the practice of self-observation. That when you find yourself in a state of reactivity, either positive reactivity or negative reactivity, what was preceding that state? Is it possible to to connect the dots? This is where you can begin to see where you're held back and how you can be free. And we become more and more aware of all these different qualities. So last week talking about the inner critic, how here's this voice, here's this kind of force inside that has got a pretty strong negativity bias. One of my favorite lines from Garrison Keillor, he said he wrote his parents when he was in college, saying, "Dear Mom and Dad, I just want you to know you no longer have to criticize me. I realize that I have completely internalized your voices, and I'm doing it for you from now on." I shared earlier how, like, when we're young, we're like a little open hard drive in the virus protection, and we just take on these qualities. We take on these perceptions, just assuming they're true. And when you're in conflict, when we're having a hard time making a decision, this is when it becomes kind of a ripe opportunity to see more into the nature of these forces or these somethings or these voices. And this is where it just gets so juicy. I was in a conversation, an exploration with someone who was in a deep question: do I stay in my relationship or do I go? And this is one of the most painful areas of conflict, whether to end a relationship, whether to stay on. And for her, it got even more complex because, of course, there were children, their families were interconnected. She married young. The whole thing. You may be familiar with the line of Zorba the Greek when he was asked if he was married. He said, wife, children, house, the full catastrophe. But she was very much caught in this sense of Something in me feels like it's time for me to move on. Something in me isn't so sure. And what was helpful for her was beginning to kind of tease out some of these somethings, to actually begin to kind of open to kind of sense, do I stay? Do I go? What is it that wants me to stay? What is that force that wants me to go? So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but have you ever gone through the ending of a relationship? Raise your hand. No, don't. If it's not too traumatizing, you might just take a moment to reflect now on how conflicted you were back then. Or maybe not. Maybe it was clear as day. You absolutely knew what you had to do. But chances are you are feeling a lot of conflicting voices, a lot of conflicting thoughts, a lot of energetic forces inside that were at different times pushing you in different directions. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the models for these voices or these forces inside. And then we're going to explore a technique that I found very, very helpful. So we're familiar with what are referred to as sometimes as the hindrances or the 5 obstacles. I like to think of them as the 5 growth opportunities. These are the 5 energies that make it impossible to be present. And they are greed, hatred, restlessness, sloth, and doubt. When you're caught in aversion, judgment, anger, blame, impossible to be present. When you're caught in wanting, fantasy, craving, thirst, again. When you're caught in worry, restlessness, hypervigilance. When you're caught in sloth and torpor, depression. When you're caught in doubt, self-criticism. Now, these 5 states, as I've said, the good news is there are only 5. The bad news is they are also pervasive. The main avenue to freedom, when you experience these states and they occlude any sense of mindfulness, is to notice them. As soon as you can name what's happening inside, you've begun to shift your relationship with it. It doesn't mean it's over. But just naming it helps to reinforce that sense of the observer, of the witness, where then you can begin to explore how to be with it. In that same way, we have these emotional qualities. If you've seen the movie Inside Out, the Pixar movie, it explores the fundamental emotions in a young girl. And these if you haven't seen the movie, you've got to see it. It's just so good. And you can see the interplay of these emotions. There's joy and there's sadness. There's anger and there's disgust. And depending on which one has the microphone, that's where the little girl goes. And just to say that there's a really wonderful thing, I had mentioned this in a talk maybe a year or so ago, that there was a big debate, which of the emotions are going to be the most powerful. And I believe it was the producer who really wanted Schadenfreude. Schadenfreude is the kind of the joy you take at other people's pain. He lost out that argument, but I think it would have added a lot to the movie. And then we get into sort of the sophistication of internal family systems. And again, I'm not an expert in this, but just a quick overview. That when you begin to look at all these different voices, the somethings, the parts, the forces inside, that you can begin to recognize that there are sort of the managers. The managers have to do with protection. They may have to do, like, for example, of like wanting everything to be perfect. That's sort of like managing your state. Some others call it the controller. And then you have the exiles. And these are the these are the elements that you just don't want to feel. It's pain and shame and trauma and loss. So these are the kind of the forces or the voices that show up from time to time. Then you have the firefighters, and the firefighters, when the exiles break out, when you have a shame attack, the firefighter or the manager is there to handle it. And that's when you'll notice you're distracted or you're caught in impulsive behavior. Maybe you're overworking or you're self-medicating. The whole idea there is to kind of distract you from kind of what's below the line coming up to the surface and get it back below the line. And so you can sense how when you're in conflict, here are these different qualities that are at play all the time. The controller, the firefighter, trying to make sure everything stays steady. And then these exiled emotions and feelings and forces that show up from time to time. And then we have the self, which is sort of the whole. It's all of these parts. It's mindfulness. It's clear seeing. So if you're interested in IFS, internal family systems, it's a beautiful way of taking mindfulness and exploring all these different components inside that can help to create an amazing quality of clarity at times. And then there are other forces. There's a beautiful book called Rediscovering the Archetypes of the Mature Masculine. It talks about the forces of the king, the force of the warrior, the magician, and the lover. That as men, and certainly as women as well, that we have these qualities of the king, the warrior, the magician, the lover, and each of those is over time growing into its maturity. Each of them has a shadow side, and each of these mold our character. And as you become more aware of these somethings inside, these voices or forces, you can become more awake to your conditioning and ultimately point toward your capacity to embrace or feel or know the unconditioned. We have the 8 worldly winds, which are all the forces that move us toward and move us against. The desire for success, to win, for pleasure, to be known, to be successful, and the fear of the opposite, of losing, of pain, of shame, of blame. So how do we work with all of these? Now, you could just say that mindfulness itself, the practice itself, is naturally organic. And I do believe there's something very, very powerful about this, that when you relax, when you pay attention, that there is a natural process that evolves. The more you relax, the more you feel safe, the more you can develop that sense of the observer, the more there is an organic arising of everything that's between you and feeling free. I believe that when we truly relax and open and call in sincerity and authenticity, that there's an organic movement of consciousness toward becoming more whole. And as you follow that impulse to feel more whole, to know your true nature, that there is a really beautiful process of unwinding. Things just start to arise when it's organically present. The counter argument to that is when you've experienced strong trauma. And we've all experienced trauma to different degrees. We've all experienced fear and helplessness. And so there are times, and again, we go back to the fundamental questions of rain meditation, just recognizing what's presenting, naming it. Naming it establishes that sense of the witness. And then opening into the question of the A of rain. Can I allow? Can I actually accept this? It's so important, and I say this every time, sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's just too much. Sometimes maybe you don't have the energy or the vitality to be with it. Sometimes you might need some accompaniment. If you can, then you move into the I, to the investigation. And this is all an element of that investigation. And the N, of course, is to nurture what you find with some kind of loving presence. So as sort of like a build on FSI, family systems, there's an interesting application here in a Zendo in San Francisco. And there's a lot of conflict happening in the community. And, there's always this, I think a lot of people have an idealized sense of what happens in a spiritual community. And the truth is, in any spiritual community or in most nonprofits, there's a huge amount of conflict. It's all waking up and stepping on each other's toes. And so they explored using this whole practice of family systems. And what they noticed is that you could actually apply this internally. And how it works, and I don't have much time here, so I'm just going to touch on this, so I'll leave a little experience, is that when we're caught in conflict, quite often we're caught in that negative self-talk. The inner critic gets really, really strong. And we become more aware of these voices or these forces or parts. And primarily what we notice is that there's slightly different language, is that there's the controller. That's kind of like the manager or the firefighter. That there's this element of the controller that's just wanting to make sure things are going the way we want it to go. Then there's also the voice or the part of the skeptic, the kind of doubting mind. And there's also a quality of mind, which is kind of the seeking mind, like that quality of awareness that really wants to know the truth. That's just seeking and looking and trying to figure things out. And then there's also this quality of non-seeking mind, that quality of mind that is opening into non-judging, non-preferential awareness. And as you become more aware of kind of the play of the internal dialogue, sometimes it's helpful to kind of identify the controller, the skeptic, the seeking mind, and there are other parts which I'll mention in a little bit. But with all these parts, and part of how this practice goes is that you also tune into what's called big mind. And big mind it's Buddha mind. It's the ground of being. It's awake awareness. You might even think of it as God or God consciousness. Another part or another voice is big heart, which is the compassionate response to pain. Sometimes big heart shows up as tough love. Sometimes it shows up as tender love. So when there's a conflict, part of the practice is, and again, for this you need to be both relaxed and alert. There's an internal state that really helps you kind of stay with this, is you kind of ask to speak to the voices. And when I first started practicing this, it just feels so weird. It's just a weird practice. But basically what's happening is, you're just capturing the stream that's already there. And so you might just say, and when I've done this in the past, like in a troubled relationship, I would just say, okay, I'd like to speak to the controller. And then I just say, so as the controller, what do you have to say? And the controller might say, you're just waffling all over the place, and I'm just doing my best to try to create a steady state here. I can thank the controller and I'll say, okay, well, let me talk to the skeptic. What do you have to say about this? And the skeptic might say, so many people they use you, and you can't let people step over you anymore. Well, okay, thank you for sharing. Well, let me speak to the seeking mind. And the seeking mind might say, stay open and figure out what this is, because there's the possibility of mastery here. And then I might explore, okay, big mind. What does big mind have to say about this? And again, it can feel weird, but quite often there's this sense of some presence that might come through that might say, everything's okay, just trust, stay open, stay awake. And I might ask, okay, so big heart, well, what do you have to say about this? And big heart might say, open to the other person's point of view. What are they needing? What are they wanting? Take a look at that, and there might be some juice down that. So this practice is, again, it's not about making things go away. It's about being more and more in present moment, non-judging awareness. It's about opening and getting more familiar with the conditioned self. Of course, there are other voices. There's the damaged self, the angry self, the spiritual warrior, the child. But if you like, we're going to take just a few minutes for this, just to get a taste of this. If you like, you can close your eyes. And you might bring into mind just kind of a problematic situation you're caught in. Take a moment just to deepen your breath. Just sense what it feels like. If you have a sense of this, just take a moment to ask to the controller, what does the controller have to say about this situation? Can you sense the part of the skeptic? What does the skeptic have to say? And if you can sense this internal part or voice of the seeking mind, what would the seeking mind like to say right now? And can you sense non-seeking mind? And you might just sort of take a moment just to sort of feel that quality of non-seeking mind. And you might ask to speak now to big mind. This is the quality of the ground of being, of awake awareness, of the Buddha mind, or maybe even, you might even think of it as God or God consciousness. What does God consciousness or big mind have to say about this right now? And you might sense big heart, the compassionate response to pain. What does big heart have to say about this right now? And you might now kind of let this fall away. Just take 3 slow, deep breaths and sense anything that may have shifted, anything you might want to retain from this practice. If you like, you can open your eyes. That was a pretty truncated romp. But you may find it a helpful component in your practice, particularly when you feel caught. It's very powerful to do this journaling, to kind of crystallize those words. It's going to be very helpful to speak aloud. There's something about speaking aloud, what these different parts or voices have to say, that can sometimes provide very powerful information. And again, it's always helpful to sense that this is not about fixing. It's about getting more familiar with the nature of who you are as a conditioned being. This quote again from Michael Singer. This is a juicy one. There's nothing more important to true growth than realizing you are not the voice of the mind. You are the one who hears it. If you don't understand this, you will try to figure out which of the many things the voice says is really you. And here we are in this exquisite balance of the willingness to open to these voices or parts, to listen to what they have to say. But the key, the really liberating piece here, is remembering that you are the one who hears the voices. That becomes a doorway to real freedom. This leads to so many paradoxes. You may be familiar with the phrase that to study the self is to forget the self. And to forget the self is to know the self. So you may find in your practice, particularly in times of conflict, times when you may feel confused, that it might be helpful to explore this sense of establishing this sense of the observer, the one who is aware. And to sense, can you feel the voice or the force of the controller or the skeptic? And reinforce this sense of who you are as big mind or big heart. And what fuels all of this is the deep sincerity to be more awake, to be more present to your life. To me, that's the purity that carries us through the practice with all these different permutations and all these different possibilities, all these different ways of practicing. I hope you found this helpful. I find these practices at times can be really, really juicy. At other times, it's really helpful to drop them all. But just to trust that there's something that's guiding you. And that something that's guiding you is you. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope this was helpful, and many, many blessings in your practice and in all things.